So we all already know that the Star Wars we're getting today isn't the Star Wars that George Lucas envisioned. That isn't a rumor, that isn't speculation, that is 100% fact, confirmed by George Lucas. And that's really sad for people like me and you. And not only because Star Wars is being ruined by stuff like the High Republic, but it's also just sad because I look up to George Lucas. I respect that guy more than anyone else in the world. He changed cinema, he revolutionized cinema multiple times. And to see his work, to see his creation just disrespected the way it is, it's really sad. But back in October, George Lucas did an interview with a school, and a lot of people didn't see this interview until now. Star Wars Theory did a video on it, as well as my friend a Black Jedi. I'm sure if you sub to me, you probably sub to him as well, but if you don't already sub to him, the link will be in the description. In this interview, George Lucas is asked about the fight for racial justice, and how is that going to fit inside of Star Wars. Let's roll the clip.
No, I mean, I've kind of lost control of Star Wars, so it's going off in a different path than what I intended. But the first 6 are very much mine and my philosophy.
So as you can see in the first few words that George says, he absolutely destroys Disney Star Wars. He immediately says that he's lost control and nothing that happens after episode 6 has anything to do with him. And you can really see the hurt in his voice. You can see that he just feels betrayed. And they have all these people saying that George Lucas doesn't care about Star Wars. He's sitting on $4 billion, but George Lucas cares. That's his creation and it's being absolutely ruined, and you can hear it in his voice. I don't think he's sitting in his house crying about it, but I just think he's mad and he feels betrayed. And I think he regrets selling Star Wars. Even if it was just going to stick with 6 movies, I think George would much rather never have another Star Wars show or movie than have what we're getting now with the sequel trilogy and the High Republic. All these politics being put into Star Wars. That's not what George envisioned. And he talks about that in this next clip.
Sort of goes beyond any particular time, because it's based on history, it's based on philosophy, it's based on a lot of things. And you know, the first 3 basically tell you how a democracy turns into a dictatorship, and you end up with a tyrant, the emperor. It's a very important now, where we are now in our political history.
So in that clip, you hear George Lucas address the fact that everyone always says that politics have always been in Star Wars. That politics being in Star Wars today is no different than the politics that were in the prequels. And that's just not true. The politics that were in the prequels were based off basic history and philosophy. It was universally accepted concepts in America. Concepts like dictatorships are bad. I think that's universally accepted in America right now. For how long? Who knows? Nah, I'm just kidding. But seriously, George Lucas didn't have identity politics and woke versus conservative, left versus right. That just didn't exist in Star Wars, because he knows it has no place. Those aren't timeless politics. Dictatorships being bad is timeless. Democracies turning into dictatorships are timeless. That has happened over and over in history, and history repeats itself, and George knows that. So the woke identity politics that are in Star Wars today is not what George Lucas did in the prequels, and if you say that it is, you don't only not understand Star Wars, but you just don't understand basic politics and philosophy. Let's go to the next clip.
The other part was that in there, it's like, I purposely, all of the various colors and shapes of the aliens and everything that live in that world, it's a normal situation. There's no real discrimination. The only discrimination is against robots. And we haven't really reached that period yet. And I'm sure the robots will be able to overcome it. Because they don't have the same feelings.
So in that clip, you hear George say that discrimination doesn't exist in the Star Wars universe. There's only discrimination against droids. And the reason for that is it's timeless politics. At least for the foreseeable future in our life, there will be no discrimination against droids. But there will always be discrimination. And he put that discrimination against droids in Star Wars to represent the discrimination that happens in real life. But he doesn't put discrimination in Star Wars against certain genders or certain races because he knows it's not timeless. It's just so horrible what Kathleen Kennedy and Disney has done with Star Wars. And I have enjoyed some of their content, but pretty much every single piece of content that I've ever enjoyed even a little bit, I can see the major flaws in it. And it's not only in the politics that are in it. Some of the movies are just poorly made. Like The Rise of Skywalker is just a bad film. But then you add in the woke politics, the identity politics, and you just ask the question, what has Star Wars become? And you know George is sitting in his house asking the same thing. And another huge thing that this interview proves, and I know George has said this over and over and it kind of became a meme, but Star Wars was thought out much deeper than we think. George is a very smart and well-read guy. He knows his history, he knows his philosophy, and you can see that inside of Star Wars. Disney is not well-read. Kathleen Kennedy is not well-read. They're not smart people. They're not philosophical people. They just chase money. And they think that they can profit off the politics in real life right now. George didn't try to profit off politics in real time. George just put philosophy and history into Star Wars. There's a huge difference. And when you start putting non-timeless politics into your movies, then those movies become non-timeless as well. The original trilogy, the prequel trilogy are timeless trilogies in terms of the content inside the movie. You can say what you want about the prequel's visual effects, and yeah, they don't hold up today, but they were made 20 years ago. The content inside those movies holds up today. If you start putting woke politics and real-time politics into your movies, they will not hold up in 20 years. And that's just a fact, because the politics that are hot today were not hot in the history books. There was no identity politics back then. Americans are just so privileged today that we're worried about that stuff. People back in history weren't worried about that stuff because they're worried about where their next meal is going to come from. Americans don't have to worry about that for the most part, so we're worried about who's transphobic and who doesn't have pronouns in their bio. And that's the kind of politics that are going to be put in Star Wars. And that's just not what George Lucas would want. And every single decision that's made inside of Star Wars should revolve around would George Lucas want this in Star Wars. Every single one. Because not only did George create Star Wars, but he pioneered cinema and should be shown some respect. And he's gotten none of that so far outside of The Mandalorian. And I think that's why The Mandalorian is so good, because they actually think, what would George do in this situation? And Dave Filoni actually knows what George would do in that situation. And they even bring George on set sometimes to see what George would do in certain situations. And that's something that the sequel trilogy lacked greatly. But maybe the future's bright with John and Dave in charge. I really hope so. But let me know what you guys think of this George Lucas interview, where he makes some statements on the politics that are inside of Star Wars, and why they're not the same type of politics that he had in his Star Wars. Do you agree with him that he had timeless politics in his movies, while the politics in Star Wars today are not timeless at all? Or do you think the politics in Star Wars today will become timeless in the future? Let me know in the comments. If you hate Kathleen Kennedy as much as I do, I have dropped some Ruined by Kathleen Kennedy merch. If you want to check that out, the link to that will be in the description. If you want to follow me on Twitter or join the Discord, both of those links will be in the description as well. But thank you for watching the video, and I hope to see you on the next one.